And I'm sure he did too much. He did too much of it. Was he teetering on the edge of what might be called schizophrenia at the time? I think so.
Pink Floyd, the iconic British rock band, is considered the greatest of all time in the progressive rock genre. However, their success was not enough to prevent their breakup due to internal tensions. Why did the members leave the band? Why didn't they try to reconcile and keep the band alive? At the age of 80, Roger Waters finally reveals how Pink Floyd ended. Discover the power struggles and conflicts behind Waters' shocking revelations. First, let's recall the heroic history of this band to see how regrettable their disbandment was. Richard Wright, Pink Floyd, Roger Waters, and Nick Mason were among the initial members who enrolled in the London Polytechnic on Regent Street in September 1962, intending to study architecture. 2 years down the road, Syd Barrett, who was 2 years younger than him, uprooted his life and headed to London to attend Camberwell College of Arts. Waters and Barrett had been pals ever since they were kids. The two would frequently visit Barrett's mom to hear him play guitar. After some thought, Mason remembered Barrett and how, while everyone else was being awkwardly cool, Syd stood out for being authentically extroverted. The first time they met, when Syd attempted to introduce himself, Mason recalled with fondness. Initially, Waters and Mason were members of a band that also included Clive Metcalfe, Keith Noble, and Sheila Noble, who was a classmate of Noble's. Later that year, Richard Wright, yet another architecture student, joined the group, transforming Sigma 6 from an ensemble into a sextet. Mason performed drums, Waters played lead guitar, and Wright switched from rhythm to keyboards. The band practiced in a tea room in the basement of the Regent Street Polytechnic and played on private occasions, performing songs written by the Seekers and Ken Chapman, who was also their manager and a fellow student. Mike Leonard, a part-time tutor at the neighbouring Hornsey College of Art and the Regent Street Polytechnic, owned the flat at 39 Stanhope Gardens in Highgate, London, where Waters and Mason relocated in September 1963. Following Mason's departure at the end of the 1964 school year, guitarist Bob Close stepped in during September of the same year, forcing Waters to transition to bass. The Megadeths, Abdabs, Screaming Abdabs, Leonard's Lodgers, and Spectrum 5 were some of Sigma 6's previous incarnations before they settled on the T-set. Syd Barrett, a guitarist, joined Close and Waters at Stanhope Gardens in September 1963, just before Metcalfe and Noble departed to establish their band. Chris Dennis, a vocalist and Royal Air Force technician, was introduced to the band by Close. One of Wright's acquaintances lent them some free studio time in West Hampstead in December 1964, so they were able to get their first recording session done. As he was on vacation from school, Wright sat out the session. Barrett took over as lead singer for the band in early 1965, when Dennis was sent to Bahrain by the Royal Air Force. Later that year, they took up residence as the house band at the Countdown Club, which is located close to Kensington High Street in London. There, they would perform 3 90-minute sets non-stop from the wee hours of the morning till the crack of dawn. At this time, the band learned they could lengthen their concerts and reduce song repetition by adding extended solos, as Mason would later write about. Barrett assumed the role of lead guitarist after Close left the band in the middle of 1965, under pressure from his parents and recommendations from his college instructors. But how did Pink Floyd overcome this early setback and reach their booming pitch? And what caused any of the disputes that ultimately led to the band's split? Observe this: a deal between Pink Floyd and EMI. The music business began to take notice of Pink Floyd in 1967. Joe Boyd, co-founder of IT, and Brian Morrison, booking agent for Pink Floyd, planned and funded a recording session at Sound Techniques in Kensington, while they were in discussions with record labels. Afterwards, Pink Floyd inked a €5,000 advance deal with EMI on February 15, 1967. On March 10, 1967, the band's first single, Arnold Lane, and its B-side, Candy in a Currant Bun, were released under the Columbia label by EMI. The record reached number 20 in the UK, despite being banned by multiple radio stations for its cross-dressing themes. This was achieved through inventive retail sales manipulation. Released on June 16, 1967, See Emily Play, Pink Floyd's second single, did somewhat better, peaking at number 6 in the UK. On Look of the Week, BBC, and Top of the Pops, BBC, the band was joined by Roger Waters, who was subjected to harsh questions, and Syd Barrett, who mimicked the band's performances, respectively. As Barrett began routinely taking LSD and grew more dissociated from his environment, his conduct started to shift drastically about this time. The evolution of Pink Floyd and their global success. David Gilmour joined Pink Floyd as a guitarist in December 1967, when the band was at a crisis point with Syd Barrett. Barrett was already a friend of Gilmour's from their time spent playing music during lunch breaks and hitchhiking and busking in southern France in the early 1960s, while they were both students at Cambridge Tech. While playing in Joker's Wild in 1965, Gilmour witnessed Barrett's band, the Tea Set. A house room and €30 per week were arranged for Gilmour by Steve O'Rourke, who was the assistant to the band management. While Barrett remained with the band as a non-performing songwriter, Gilmour was formally confirmed as Pink Floyd's newest member in January 1968 by Black Hill Enterprises. After the original plan fell through, Barrett decided to compose exclusively for the band, and Gilmour was supposed to cover for his peculiarities. The pressure to create big songs like Arnold Lane and See Emily Play was getting to Barrett, so he presented the band with a song called Have You Got It Yet? And purposefully changed its structure every time they performed it, making it hard for the other members to follow. Barrett stood apart from the rest of the group, distantly looking into space, during a photograph in January 1968. Eventually, Barrett's circumstances became intolerable. In January of 1968, when the band was traveling to a Southampton gig, things reached a peak. One member of the band said, "Nah, let's not bother," when asked whether they should pick up Barrett, ending Barrett's tenure with Pink Floyd. "He was our friend, but we wanted to strangle him most of the time," Waters thought afterwards. Pink Floyd's business partners convened in early March 1968 to plot the band's future, and Barrett consented to go. Pink Floyd's managers Jenner and King severed ties with the band to represent Barrett, who they saw as the brains behind the band. O'Rourke took over as Pink Floyd's manager, while Morrison sold his company to NEMS Enterprises. As of April 6, 1968, Black Hill Enterprises had formally announced Barrett's resignation. After Barrett left, Waters was mostly responsible for lyrics and overall artistic direction. During the band's early TV appearances in Europe, Gilmour imitated Barrett's voice. On the other hand, they subbed Barrett's songs for Waters and Wright's while playing college venues. Thinking back on this time, Mason remarked that Pink Floyd's music became much easier to enjoy once Gilmour added more structure to it. Once again, what was it about Pink Floyd's music that set them apart from other rock bands of the 60s, 70s, and 80s? Pink Floyd's genres. As one of the earliest psychedelic bands in the United Kingdom, Pink Floyd got their start playing at legendary London underground hotspots like the UFO Club and Middle Earth. Long, raucous suites including elements of hard rock, blues, country folk, and electronic music gave them their distinctively psychedelic sound by 1967, as reported by Rolling Stone. Their 1968 single Careful With That Axe, Eugene, contributed to the band's established status as an art rock legend. Space rock, acid rock, proto-prog, experimental pop, psychedelic rock, and experimental rock are some of the genres that have been linked to the band's music. Pink Floyd gained fame in the late 60s as a psychedelic pop band, which led to the press classifying their music as progressive rock, psychedelic pop, and progressive pop. The year 1968. As Richard Wright noted, "I failed to see the rationale behind our casting as the pioneering British psychedelic band. We never considered ourselves in that light. In the end, we came to terms with the fact that we were only engaging in recreational music-free playing. We were free to do as we pleased. There was a strong focus on improvising and being spontaneous. It wasn't really noteworthy, as Roger Waters would later clarify. Our antics were comical. What a waste of time. We had to resort to an experimental and foolish thing since we couldn't play. Although Syd has exceptional intelligence, I am not interested in returning to the endless hours of playing Interstellar Overdrive." During the 1970s and 1980s, Pink Floyd broke new ground in progressive rock and ambient music, respectively, by rejecting the constraints of traditional commercial forms. The guitar work of Gilmour, of Pink Floyd. according to Rolling Stone reviewer Alan DePerna, who lauded David Gilmour as the most influential guitarist of the 1960s and the missing link between Hendrix and Van Halen. Gilmour's guitar work was crucial to Pink Floyd's sound. He was also named the 14th best guitarist of all time by Rolling Stone. "My fingers make a distinctive sound," Gilmour remarked in a 2006 reflection on his approach. "I believe I am easily identifiable, even though they aren't particularly swift. Some of the songs I perform have melodies that are reminiscent of Hank Marvin or The Shadows." Gilmour was compared favorably to jazz trumpeter Miles Davis for his capacity to express strong emotion with fewer notes without compromising intensity or beauty. Guitar World writer Jimmy Brown praised Gilmour the same year, saying that his approach was defined by big basic riffs, fast, aggressive solos, and lush ambient chordal textures. Money, Time, and Comfortably Numb all have Gilmour solos that Brown compared to a laser beam piercing fog. Featuring Gilmour's trademark flawless bar vibrato, deep triplet arpeggios, and gut-wrenching 1 1/2 step-over bends, he hailed the Time solo as a masterwork of motivic development and phrasing. Brown said that one of Gilmour's strongest talents as a lead guitarist was his instinctive phrasing. Gilmour detailed the process that gave him his distinctive voice. "Get singing sustain using a fuzzbox, delay, and bright EQ, that's what I normally do. You should aim for a volume level close to the feedback threshold when playing. Playing with bent notes that cut like a razor is a lot more enjoyable." Sound experimentation by Pink Floyd. Pink Floyd never stopped experimenting with their sound. At the May 12, 1967, premiere of their second single, See Emily Play, at London's Queen Elizabeth Hall, the band debuted an azimuth coordinator, an early quadraphonic gadget. With the use of this device, typically handled by Richard Wright, the band was able to modulate its amplified sound and recorded recordings, creating a whirling musical effect by projecting the audio 270 degrees around the audience. In 1972, Pink Floyd invested in a state-of-the-art 4-channel, 360-degree public address system, which allowed them to take their live sound to the next level. In addition to utilizing a Benson Echo Rec 2 delay effect on the bass line for one of these days, Roger Waters dabbled with the VCS-3 synthesizer on tunes such as On the Run, Welcome to the Machine, and In the Flesh. As they recorded the final version, the band made use of state-of-the-art audio recording gear and creative sound effects. The experimental holophonic technology, which Nick Mason mostly used to create his album contributions, was a method for simulating a three-dimensional soundscape. By utilizing standard stereotypes, this system could make the listener feel as though the music were emanating from all directions around their head, as if they were in a room with their headphones on. In 1968, Pink Floyd also joined the committee and started writing music for films. Their 1969 album More is the score for the film More, directed by Barbet Schroeder. They made a lot of money off of this endeavor, and they also got some great material that they used in their live performances for a while, along with songs from A Saucer Full of Secrets. For over a month, the band stayed in a 5-star Rome hotel to compose music for Michelangelo Antonioni's Zabriskie Point. If Antonioni hadn't incessantly demanded revisions, they might have produced the score in less than a week, according to Roger Waters. Only 3 of their recordings made it into the final mix. Out of the ones that didn't cut, one called The Violent Sequence became Us and Them, which was included on their 1973 album The Dark Side of the Moon. The 1971 soundtrack album Obscured by Clouds was the result of Pink Floyd's and Schroeder's second collaboration on the film La Ballet. When it was released, the album became their first to enter the top 50 on the US Billboard chart. They created the songs in roughly a week at the Château d'Aurevilles outside Paris. Performances by Pink Floyd in concert. At early performances at places like London's UFO Club, they augmented their hallucinogenic music with visual effects. They were very successful in London's underground scene, in large part due to their pioneering use of a slide and light display in British rock. In 1966, Pink Floyd played to an audience of 2,000 at the Roundhouse to mark the debut of the London Free Schools journal International Times. Among the notable attendees were Paul McCartney and Marianne Faithfull. Peter Wynne Wilson, who joined the band in mid-1966 as tour manager, upgraded the lighting gear with cutting-edge tools including mirrors, polarizers, and stretched condoms. A Ford Transit van, the band's ostentatious means of transportation, was acquired by Pink Floyd upon signing a record deal with EMI. At London's Alexandra Palace, they were the main attraction for an all-night extravaganza known as the 14-hour Technicolor Dream on April 29, 1967. Arriving at the event at approximately 3 o'clock, the band began their lengthy journey from the Netherlands. Just as the sun started to rise, they mounted the stage. Their participation in the live BBC television coverage of the Apollo 11 moon landing in July 1969 was prompted by their space-themed music and lyrics. They played an instrumental piece called Moonhead. They first showed off the massive circular screen that would later become synonymous with their live performances in November 1974. Algae, a gigantic helium and propane-filled pig that hovered above the crowd and popped during the 1977 In the Flesh tour, was an addition to their repertoire by that point. The idea of their album, The Wall, was heavily impacted by the audience's reaction and the vast stadium sizes during this tour. Afterwards, on the Wall tour, the band and audience were separated by a 40-foot wall. Through holes in the wall, viewers could see parts of the tale animatedly projected onto the wall. Giant inflatable figures, standing in for the story aspects of the record, were also part of the tour. Comfortably Numb was a standout event of the tour, with David Gilmour appearing on top of the wall to perform his renowned solo while bathed in brilliant blue and white lights. A technician stood behind Gilmour while he stood on an unsteady flight case on casters, and the two of them were positioned on a massive hydraulic platform. An anonymous user on the Division Bell tour went by the name Publius and posted a message on a news group, challenging fans to solve a mystery that was reportedly contained in the album. Enigma Publius was lit up by white lights before the stage during an East Rutherford performance. Broadcast live from Earl's Court on October 20th, 1994, the word Enigma was superimposed on the stage backdrop throughout the broadcast concert. It was their record label, not the band, that started the Publius Enigma mystery, as Nick Mason came to admit later. But what exactly were all of those arguments that kept everyone in the group on their toes? The ongoing conflicts between Pink Floyd members. There was a lot of friction within Pink Floyd about the royalties distribution, especially because the royalties were calculated per song. Animal's massive first single Dogs, which occupied almost the whole first side of the album, was mostly produced by David Gilmour, who believed he was getting less money than Roger Waters. Pigs on the Wing, a shorter two-part tune, was supplied by Waters on the other hand. Additionally, Richard Wright admitted his responsibility for the discrepancy, stating, "It was partly my fault because I didn't push my material." He went on to claim that Dave had something to contribute, but was only able to get a few of the items included. Roger was completely engrossed in his ideas, but he was purposefully putting Dave down and irritating him, according to Nick Mason. Gilmour barely had a hand in making the album since he was so busy with the birth of his first kid. Animals also received little involvement from Wright and Mason. The problems in his marriage and his tense relationship with Waters also had a role in his diminished participation. Interestingly, Wright did not get a composition credit on any of Pink Floyd's albums until Animals. Their relationship deteriorated because he saw this omission as evidence of Waters' increasing self-confidence as the band's only creative power. Animals debuted at number 2 in the United Kingdom and number 3 in the United States upon its January 1977 release. One of the most severe, unrelenting, terrifying, and blatantly iconoclastic chunks of music. That is how NME characterized the album. Carl Dallas, who composed the music, characterized it as an unsettling taste of truth in an otherwise increasingly numbing medium. The Next in the Flesh tour, which heavily featured Animals, put Pink Floyd through their paces playing in gigantic stadiums. Because of the magnitude of the venues, the band felt nervous. Wright threatened to resign and even traveled back to England, while Waters started showing up to places alone and departing soon after concerts. Waters spit at a fan during a performance in Montreal's Olympic Stadium because he was annoyed by the overly passionate and rowdy audience. Gilmour was dejected at the tour's conclusion because he thought the band had accomplished what they set out to do and had nothing more to prove. Waters offered 2 concepts for Pink Floyd's subsequent album in July 1978, while the band was in the throes of a financial crisis caused by bad investments. 2 recordings were made by Waters. One was a 90-minute demo with the working title Bricks in the Wall, and the other was the pros and cons of hitchhiking. Her debut solo album. Mason and Gilmour chose the former despite their first qualms. As a co-producer, Bob Ezrin wrote a comprehensive 40-page album screenplay. The idea centered on Pink, a figure influenced by Waters' traumatic experiences as a youngster, especially the loss of his father during World War II. In Pink's case, the demands of the music industry and Syd Barrett's fall contributed to her spiral into megalomania and isolation, which the wall symbolically reflected. Pink demolishes the wall and regains his humanity at the end of the narrative. As tensions rose throughout the Wall's recording, Wright was let go for his few efforts. While Gilmour said that Wright didn't contribute much to the record, Mason pointed out that Wright did nothing more than show up to sessions and not contribute anything at all. Based on what Waters said, the band had already decided that Wright could either stay and fight or quietly depart, and he went with the latter. For 15 weeks after its debut on November 30, 1979, The Wall ruled the US Billboard charts and peaked at number 3 in the United Kingdom. The level of intimacy inside the band has never been lower. Their 4 Winnebagos were arranged in a circle, with each one facing the other. Waters slept in several places, using his van as a mode of transit. Despite losing $600,000 on the tour, Wright returned as a professional musician and became the only band member to see a profit. Waters, on the other hand, suggested a project called Spare Bricks in 1982. It was going to be the score for Pink Floyd's The Wall. But as the Falklands War broke out, Waters turned his attention to fresh content, praising Margaret Thatcher's handling of the fight and dedicated the album to his late father. Instead of reusing unfinished songs from The Wall, several people thought the CD needed brand new material. In place of the normally absent Wright, Michael Kamen acted as a mediator between them. Waters and Gilmour went their ways as tensions within the band rose. Because Waters felt Gilmour had little to no say in the production, his name was finally scrubbed from the credits. Mason recorded sound effects for a holophonic system and had a little role in the album overall, although he stayed emotionally distant because of his marital problems. Waters used the album cover to further emphasize the band's internal strife. Waters denied Gilmour's request to postpone the creation of fresh content. Gilmour came clean about his flaws later on, but he still thought Waters was crazy for insisting on including unpopular songs in the mix. The resignation of Waters and the ensuing legal disputes about Face, David Gilmour's second solo album, was recorded in 1984 following Roger Waters' resignation and the ensuing court challenges. The release of this album gave Gilmour the opportunity to articulate his views on a variety of subjects, such as the assassination of John Lennon and his tense relationship with Waters. Later on, he claimed that the record gave him the opportunity to put some space between himself and Pink Floyd. While this was going on, Waters started touring for his debut solo album, which was titled The Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking. At around the same time, Richard Wright and Dave Harris established a new band that they called Z and produced an album called Identity. The record was completely overlooked by the critical community. During the same month, August 1985, Nick Mason released his second solo album, which was titled Profiles. In 1984, Gilmour, Mason, Waters, and Steve O'Rourke, the manager of the band, got together for dinner to talk about the future of Pink Floyd. Following the conclusion of the discussion, Mason and Gilmour expressed their belief that the band could continue once Waters had finished his solo effort. They mentioned that they had previously gone through hiatuses themselves. After the meal, though, Waters was certain that Gilmour and Mason had reached a consensus that Pink Floyd had disbanded. In his biography, Mason subsequently remarked on how Waters saw the meeting as more of a diplomatic attempt at concealment and wrote, "Our communication skills were still troublingly non-existent. We left the eatery with different interpretations of the decision." Waters made it clear after the album The Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking came out that Pink Floyd was not getting back together. In order to resolve any outstanding royalties, he reached out to O'Rourke. Waters was so enraged that he sought O'Rourke's removal as manager of the band after O'Rourke felt compelled to notify Mason and Gilmour. Peter Rudge was appointed by Waters to take over his affairs when he ended his management contract with O'Rourke. He also requested relief from his contractual duties and announced his resignation from the band in letters to EMI and Columbia. According to Gilmour, Waters departed to speed up the band's disintegration. Subsequently, Waters asserted that Pink Floyd may be in violation of the contract and face a suspension of royalty payments until they released new albums. He thought the other band members had sued him for leaving the group. Waters eventually went all the way to the Supreme Court, claiming that Pink Floyd had reached its creative peak and wanting to disband the band and stop anybody from using the Pink Floyd moniker. Waters went back to the High Court to get a veto over anything that may be done with the band's name when his attorneys found out that the partnership had never been officially confirmed. In a press statement, Gilmour confirmed Pink Floyd's continuation. The matter was ultimately resolved without going to court. The final paperwork was signed on Christmas Eve 1987 on Gilmour's houseboat, the Astoria. Waters expressed remorse for the case in 2013, admitting that he should have recognized the commercial worth of the Pink Floyd moniker apart from the band members. Did Roger Waters ever make an effort to fix his mistakes? Let's investigate. Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd will be remade by Roger Waters as a solo album. Embrace the new era. In honor of the album's half-century jubilee, Roger Waters has re-recorded a track from the legendary 1970s Pink Floyd album. On October 6th, the Redux version of The Dark Side of the Moon will be released. Today, the audio track and lyric video for the album's first single, Money, were released. The song is a new version of the 1973 classic. Although some may see the re-recording as a nod to Swift's work, Waters has made it clear that he isn't trying to displace the original, but rather provide a more refined take that enhances it. The new Money version hints at a possible replacement for his estranged ex-partner, David Gilmour, on lead vocals and guitar. The original guitar solo is substituted with a long new poem set in a figurative boxing ring, and Waters assumes Gilmour's position on the mic, whispering the words. There has been a radical change to the song, giving it a bluesier vibe and removing the signature cash register noises and other elements from the arrangement. An early reviewer likened it to a recital by Leonard Cohen. Another first peek at the new version's potential sound comes via Waters' 11-second instrumental teaser of Breathe. Although it was short, it was more faithful to the original than the new Money. Accompanying the introduction of the album, Waters posted a YouTube interview in which he explained the concept while playing some of the reworked pieces. Waters says in the interview that they wanted to reimagine Dark Side for its 50th anniversary so that they could appreciate its heritage and go further into its themes rather than replace the original. The original recording and the work by Mason, Wright and Gilmour are two of his favorite things, he adds. A better reflection and representation of the record's theme characterized the new recording. Similar to the original's 10-song CD and double LP order, the new album follows suit. The re-recording served as inspiration for an additional 13 minutes of original music included in the vinyl edition. Currently, the working title for this fresh tune is Original Composition. Collaborating with Waters on production, the album showcases a roster of musicians who were previously part of Waters' touring band. Seifert plays bass and other instruments. Joey Waronker plays the drums, Jonathan Wilson plays the guitar, Johnny Shepherd plays keyboards, Via Mardo plays the theremin, Asniv Korkedjian sings, John Caron plays keyboards and lap steel, and Gabe Knoll takes care of string arrangements. Independent label SGB Music will release the record, with distribution handled by Cooking Vinyl, after Waters' decades-long split from Sony Music. December saw the release of Waters' prior EP, The Lockdown Sessions, on Sony Legacy. Like that one, it included re-recorded songs, primarily from The Wall and The Final Cut. Since Amused to Death came out in 1992, Waters' solo repertoire has seen very little new material. Thus, these two projects are rather unusual contributions. Both his 2017 album, Is This the Life We Want? And his 2018 rendition of The Soldier's Tale by Igor Stravinsky were published by him. With his stances on China and American leadership, his backing of Russia's activities in Ukraine, his support for Palestinians and attacks of IEPAL, and the new Dark Side's arrival, Waters has become a more divisive figure. Some of his admirers feel squished during his long-running dispute with Gilmour, which has been becoming hotter in recent years. Waters usually performs authentic covers of Pink Floyd songs while on tour, with other members of his band filling in for Gilmour. In contrast to his customary method of reworking the band's classics, these reworked studio versions take a very different approach. Fans of Pink Floyd would be hard-pressed to find another example when a rock icon like Waters had the guts to rework a whole album with such drastically different arrangements. However, there have been comparisons to Swift's re-recordings. What do you think about this unfortunate breakup? Who is really at fault, after all? Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. We would love to hear from you. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more interesting updates. Thank you and see you in the next